this for you. So my name is Lottie Baker. I am the Regional English Language Officer, usually based in Kyiv, Ukraine. And so we work with teachers in Ukraine, but also in Moldova, and then Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia in the Caucasus. So welcome everyone, and excited to learn from Georgiana today.
All right, and I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Kevin. Kevin, go right ahead. Welcome your region and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Jen. I'm Kevin McCoy, the Regional English Language Officer in Belgrade, Serbia, coming to you from West Northern Ireland today. And so we welcome all of you from the countries of Central Europe and the Balkans. Thank you, Jen.
All right, and many of you are seeing this question on Mentimeter. You can go to Menti. You'll see the code menti.com. You can see the code at the top of the screen. And we'd love to know, as we warm up and welcome our audiences, how old are your students? You can choose all that applies. So maybe you teach young learners and also adults and also university students, or maybe you just focus on one of these categories. So feel free to add what's true for you as we continue to welcome our participants on both Zoom and also on Facebook to this pan-European and probably global webinar today. It's really, really wonderful to have everyone here. So maybe just to give a little bit of introduction while you're answering this question, you know, this topic came to us a couple of months ago. It's not a new topic. I think it's a topic that is always useful to teachers, but right now in this moment, educators in Europe particularly, but also globally, are looking for ways to build resilience, self-awareness, and to care for their students, to create a safe environment so that students can learn English and so many other topics in positive classroom environments. We know that you teachers in your schools and universities, you're looking for new strategies and understandings of trauma to help everyone succeed in places with displaced families, refugees, dealing with the post-pandemic reality of instruction, and students who have experienced all kinds of adversity, including abuse, bullying, poverty, or violence. And so this is the first of two workshops that will be focused on understanding trauma and then how you can deal with it in the classroom. And so this workshop, as the next one will consist of two parts. We'll spend about an hour with our English language specialist in a live stream in which you can learn about the topic and watch it later, perhaps if you'd like to go back and rewatch or you're watching asynchronously. And immediately following that 1 hour webinar that's live streamed, we'll stay online in another Zoom room in an unrecorded space where we can have a community discussion with other educators from around this region. The discussion will be facilitated by Georgiana, the specialist, as well as the other regional English language officers. So we hope you'll be active participants today and consider joining us to learn more about how you can promote well-being and resilience in your school communities. Do we have any data from our Mentimeter now? I'm wondering if there has been, oh, look at that. Kevin or Lottie, do you want to comment on this a little bit? What do you see?
So it looks to me that most of our participants are teaching students who are teenagers, 15 to 18 years old. Yeah, so we have some people teaching adults and some people teaching younger students. So there's a range. I hope the information that we learned today is going to be applicable to all different ages, but you might have to think creatively depending on what we talk about how you can apply this to your age group.
That's really useful, Lottie, and I think you're right. So maybe just a couple more expectations as we kind of settle into our webinar and discussion today. So we have some moderators. You've met Kevin and Lottie, the regional English language officers who are here. who are behind the scenes moderating the chat in both the Zoom, for those of you that are on Zoom, as well as the Facebook page on RELO Belgrade. So feel free to ask your questions and leave your comments. We'll be monitoring them, and I will be moderating this discussion with our specialist. Please keep your microphones and cameras off, and you can make constructive comments that will help further our discussion. And if you have stories that you would like to share, please consider staying on for the discussion afterwards. And we know that everyone in our audience will be sensitive about this topic that we're going to explore and experience together. So at this point, I would like to introduce our presenter, Dr. Georgiana Duarte. We're really lucky to have her here with us. She's a teacher in her heart, and you'll find that in her spirit of communicating about this topic, it comes straight through. She's an international consultant who recently retired as the Adams Endowed Professor at Indiana State University. She has a PhD in early childhood education, and she's a lot of teaching experience. Private schools, public schools, Head Start, university settings. She's been an administrator, a national program reviewer. She continues to train and consult and review on migrant, regional, and Native American Head Start programs. And she's been engaged in all kinds of teaching, service, research in areas of diverse languages, migrant education, immigrant and international cultures. She's worked a lot on the US-Mexico border and has done a lot of work there. In addition, research on perceptions of children. And I could go on and on, but I think the most important thing is that we can learn from her experience in the United States, as well as what she's done in Nepal, Peru, and Mexico. She's a lot to offer all of us here. We're delighted to have her. Welcome, Georgiana.
Thank you so much. It is a distinct pleasure to be here as your guest speaker and trainer. And so I say hello to all of you, whatever country you are in. And I like the fact that she said I was a teacher at heart, because I feel that I am a teacher at heart. So I am very pleased to introduce this topic to all of you. It's interesting that it is on May 19th. It is Mental Health Month in the United States. And I didn't realize it, and I was looking for the global mental health date, and I believe it is also May, but I have to double check. So we're doing this workshop in the perfect month to address the needs and realities of teachers globally. And thank you, Jen, for pointing out that I am on the US-Mexico border. So sometimes I'll say border, and I'll make sure I distinctively say that, because it is part of my identity. So let's begin in terms of our journey together. I'd like us to just take a moment and close our eyes and consider what trauma means to us. And I'd like you to share your ideas in the chat box. And as you're thinking about it, also be feeling about it. What are your feelings about trauma? What are your thoughts about trauma? So I'm going to stay quiet so that you can have that pensive moment and share your ideas in the chat box. But sometimes it helps just to close our eyes to close out the rest of the world.
Okay, Georgiana, one of the benefits of live streaming this is there's actually a little bit of wait time between when we ask the question and when our audiences hear it. So it does give them some peace and a moment to close their eyes. But I'm noticing that we're already getting some responses. And so we have someone commenting that it is like a shock. We have an immediate comment from Min Min that they feel peaceful in their mind. And I'm just waiting for more comments to come in. So we'll give it a couple of seconds of silence.
Okay. It could be trauma that you've observed, or it could be trauma that you've experienced. Either one.
Erin has just shared with us that it's not knowing how to cope with a perceived unsafe or dangerous situation. I'm seeing another comment here about helplessness. Another one saying it's something painful that cannot be changed. For example, the loss of a close person. Galina just shared that. Someone shared something very personal here about the pain of losing a baby. Another one of our members of our audience, Olga, has just said it's stress and uncertainty. And a couple other comments, some pain. So that seems to be a common vocabulary word that's coming up over and over again about pain from Ludmila and others.
Should we wait for a few more?
I think it's here's one more, and then maybe we can move on and people can continue to share, because I think that's part of what this is about, is bringing community together. So something that damages you, it can be also a learning experience, says Sam. So there's a lot of good thoughts here from our community that we can build upon with you today.
Excellent. Many of you brought out some really important aspects of trauma. Sometimes I feel like it's a wave. Many of you said it's painful, it's surprising, it is sometimes long-term, sometimes short-term. But let's explore our goals and come back to those, and please continue to put in the chat box your feelings and your thoughts, because this is an ongoing thread through the entire presentation. But I think the painful sharing is so true, and the surprise one is so true. During this first session, we're going to identify types of traumatic events, and it's a heavy journey, folks. And we're just going to share with you as we journey through this. It's going to be not sad, but very profoundly reflective moment. But we'll identify types of traumatic events that happen, and many of you identified some of those already: loss of someone, violence. Going back to the part one. Whoops, there we go. We'll consider the impact of trauma, and we'll explore some of the possible responses of trauma, so that we are not, at the end of the day, feeling helpless, that we have some tools and some light at the end of this forest walk that we're going on to explore trauma. So, and then part two is we'll learn to recognize and care for the ones, including ourselves, who are affected by trauma, and developing protective factors and what those protective factors consist of, and then practicing a term that is really quite, you'll see a lot of this as you explore your resources, this whole area of compassionate curiosity. And many of you probably do this already, but we'll learn more about it. Planning for action, so that we are not feeling helpless, and that we're not feeling like we're on the sidelines looking at trauma. And then promoting desired student outcomes. And I want to also put something on student outcomes, is student feelings. That is an outcome, but we really want to, some of you talked about bullying, and so we really want to promote some positive choices of our students. So we're on this journey together this morning as educators and in all the regions. And so I would like you to, as we go on this journey, to kind of observe and think about what you have observed in your own context of teaching in your own region, and reflect upon that, and to be thoughtful and open-minded. I am, when I was invited for this presentation, I thought of the diversity of your regions, the individual characteristics of your regions. And so please know that your response may not be the response down the road, that your action plan will look really different. So your response is going to be really based on your heart and mind working together to explore this area of trauma in your region. So I compared it to a forest walk, because when we're on a forest walk, we're slowly analyzing what's happening around us. And that's kind of how I'd like us to think about trauma. We're slowly analyzing all the aspects and then coming to a place where we can take action. There's that helpless hand coming out of the water. There's that feeling of, help me. But there's different types of traumatic events, and we're going to explore them because I really want to know what you're experiencing out there. So there's types of traumatic events that occur, and they can be singular, and they could be multiple. They can be short-term, or they can be long-term. And sometimes they're so complex, we can't even seem to unpack them all at once. So let's take a look. What are some of the examples of trauma or traumatic events in your area or that you've observed? So please share these in the chat box. And you notice that little brain and heart holding hands. Well, you can do either one or you can do both. I am pretty emotional sometimes, and so I usually start with my heart, but you can go either way. You can start with the brain, or you can start with the heart, or share both.
Georgiana, we're getting some comments here. There are other people who are also saying they start with their heart. I know I do too as a professional, and you know, there are things here. People are sharing abandonment, war, divorce, the death of a loved one, bullying. So a lot of good input. Well, they're not good things, but various input here. Abuse. I've been meeting with teachers at a conference I'm attending right now, and one of the topics that I've discussed during sessions has also been recovering from the pandemic, so loss or change of routines that have been difficult for students as a form of trauma, depending on how their family has handled it, and related to that, economic instability and poverty that have affected some students in teachers' classes. We have a couple more pieces of input here coming from the chat box. You know, separation from families, domestic violence, exposure to violent acts. So a lot of convergence, not having a safe space.
I notice our audience has a lot of students who are teenagers and university age. And I have to say, because of all the social platforms I'm part of, it is so clear to me, I don't teach this age population right now, but it is so clear to me how critically, how intense COVID has impacted their emotional development. Their social network is gone except for the social platforms. And now our country is waving in and out like a roller coaster of quarantine policies. And so we're back to going up the roller coaster to being masked again. So the cases are populating again. New York is probably going to be masked again soon. So it's just, and the students there's no end in sight right now. They're feeling like there is no end in sight. So, so let's take a look at the ones that many of you already said. Domestic violence actually has radically increased during COVID globally. It is not just in the United States, but domestic violence has escalated during the pandemic years, which is really no surprise given the stress and the disconnect from society and all the other support systems that communities provide when everyone is quarantined or cut off from each other. Some of the other ones, folks talked about emotional abuse, physical abuse, community violence, and part of that child neglect and abandonment, several of you have already pointed out, so I'm not going to expand on that, but that has also been heightened during COVID, because if you've got I had a neighbor who had 5 children. She was expected to be at work even though it was during COVID, and the schools were closed. They were all online. So there was just a whole year and a half of tremendous struggle with this family Two of the children were special needs. Now think about this, two of them had special needs. So they were not only neglected, but they were not seeing their specialist. One was autistic and one had physical disabilities. And so here was this, and she was a single parent. So you can imagine the guilt and the stress that she was under due to COVID. So COVID created a traumatic event that was complicated and escalated. Terrorist threats of not knowing when the next one's coming, armed conflicts and natural disasters. And you can see some of these photographs that sort of, the natural disasters can be earthquakes, they can be flooding, surprise flooding, and other environmental threats, such as Superfund sites, environmental toxic zones. I just finished looking at a movie of 3 Mile Island. Maybe some of you are familiar with that. That was a nuclear power plant situation, but it could be nuclear power plant leakages, etc. But these threats are all traumatic experiences for communities and for families. Some of you pointed these out, but these are pointed out by some of you, but a couple of them, I think we often, at least I do, often overlook the prolonged traumatic experiences that are associated with poverty. Typically when we think of trauma, we think of events, but poverty is an ongoing experience, and it can be include all of these and more. It can include family separations, loss of employment, loss of income, death or injury, and then the family is living in poverty. So it becomes incredibly an experience, a very negative experience of despair and trauma. And the caregivers are part of that. It's not just the students or the teenagers or the young children, but it's also the caregivers, the parent, the family system. And the exposure to many services that may be discontinued. I don't know globally what's happening in the mental health field, specifically for specialists, but I do know that in South America, as well as the Americas, mental health services have decreased by 1/3. Instead of increasing, they have decreased by 1/3. So now you have a population that's experiencing trauma with nowhere to go. I live in a rural area, there is no psychologist. A huge meth problem, no psychologist. They would have to travel 3 hours to go to a mental health specialist. So, so exposure to mental health or substance abuse disorders is truly a global crisis when we are facing this crisis that has been going on long before COVID. Long before COVID, mental health was not recognized as part of the conversation. So let's see what else we can examine, because trauma can be personal, which we sometimes call private experiences. Have you had or experienced or observed personal or private experiences, ones that personal or private are ones that affect us personally, and public ones are things like war conflicts that we are observing. Sometimes we're part of, but they could be public experiences that are not privately impacting us. So think of a traumatic public experience that you may have observed. And again, this could be environmental, this could be a war conflict or changing. I'll just give you one example of a very public experience that has affected me educationally for many years. It's a public one where bridges are closed. Now that seems like no big deal, but when international bridges are closed, when I taught in the border zone, many of my students lived in Mexico and crossed. And so that closure of many bridges became very traumatic for my students and very traumatic for the education that they were being denied. So it was a trauma. It was very public. There was no business, there was no trade, and because of the bridges being closed, what followed was violence. So that's one simple example, but I'm going to be quiet so you can think. And then in the chat box, you can identify either an example of a private, which might be living with a long-term illness in the family system. Maybe that person is battling cancer and this is a long-term illness, or that family member. I have a colleague on the street who has a brother who has schizophrenia. That's a long-term experience, but it's very private. And so think of an example of a private or a public experience that you'd like to share. That is a trauma experience.
Georgiana, I think this is so useful, and I want our audience to feel safe. So, I think they can identify what they want, but I'm thinking as I'm listening to you and just gonna push this a little bit further, that I was talking to a teacher from Poland yesterday, and he was sharing his top secret for being a successful teacher, which was all about signposting and making sure that students knew what was going to happen in his class at every moment, to an extreme sense. Like, he wanted an agenda, he wanted to know everything. And we were talking about that, and he started to tell me this story. And it's an example, I think, of personal trauma, that when he was a kid, his father was a truck driver and wanted to take him to France to see Paris. And so he went along with his father and as a passenger, and they got to Paris, and they didn't speak any French, and they walked like 5 kilometers into the city to be able to see the Eiffel Tower. And he and his father were there at night, and they got lost and they couldn't find their way back. And he felt like that traumatic experience he had as a child is something he carries with him in the classroom, and as a consequence does not want his students to feel unsafe, as in they don't know where they're going or they're lost at any moment. I thought that was just a really interesting personal example that this teacher doesn't know I'm sharing, but also I think is broad enough not to be too personal to share online. And then there are a lot of public examples. So I do have some examples that are coming across online that are more like those broad sweeping examples, which I think are things that we see on the nightly news when we turn on the television, right? Like environmental disasters, flooding. So there's a flooding comment here that people, have experienced. It changed their lives, changed the structure of their homes, mental health issues in the family. There's also one here, kind of like, all these kinds of like helpless type situations. So we've got some good responses, and I think we can move on from there. That's really good point between those public traumas and those personal ones that maybe we hold a little bit closer to our hearts.
Thank you for pointing out the sensitivity of what you want to share with our audience, because I think I want to assure everyone that your private observations or your private experiences don't necessarily have to be shared in the chat box. It is up to your comfort level and vulnerability to want to share. So please know that this is a safe zone. And I know that when we get into our unrecorded session, it will be a safe zone of respect and care and concern. And I think that there is a point where sometimes we don't know how to share it because we're still processing what we saw or what we experienced. And so thank you, Jen, for pointing that out, because I meant to talk about sensitivity of what we're willing to share. This is a sensitive topic. Some can be experienced publicly and privately. And sometimes we don't know how to process it. And I'll just share one private experience of mine really quickly. Is I saw something very violent when I was very young in an elevator, and it took me years to process it, to really cognitively deal with it and why I was avoiding elevators. I wasn't even aware that I was really consciously avoiding elevators. And so sometimes it takes us quite a while to process it and put it into perspective, because I was very young when I witnessed it. So the impact of trauma is diverse. It is individual. It is like the complexity of who we are. And so we'll all respond quite differently. We'll all process it very differently, just as our students will. So let's look at, with careful eyes, the impact of trauma. It impacts our relationships, and many of you have pointed this out. So, you very eloquently, it impacts the communities in which we may work, or the communities that are our social network, which I always call our tribe. And it may impact our work environment or the organizations that we interact with. And I'm just going to give you an example of an organization really quickly. Is I have a lot of nieces who are nurses. I have my 2 sons are high school teachers, and their organizations, they have a collective trauma. And that trauma might be dealing with COVID during the educational shutdowns of schools, or it could be a private trauma of all my nieces. I have 4 who are all nurses during COVID who have been impacted privately, but also publicly, because there's a collective trauma of nurses across our nation saying goodbye in private rooms to patients who are not going to survive COVID. So trauma impacts all of these in different ways. Prolonged trauma is when it's repetitive there and when it's constant. So let's just give an example. Is if I heard the alarm or the siren for hurricanes when I lived in a hurricane zone on the border of US and Mexico for quite a while, but now I'm in a different area of the border. But I would hear those sirens all the time. And finally I was blocking them out. My natural alarm system was sort of malfunctioning. I was blocking them out. Children and students do this a great deal if it's repetitive. Or it could be the trauma exposure to bullying. At some point they just are numb. But their natural alarm system is not functioning. They're no longer going to the teacher. They're no longer having a sudden scare response. Their alarm system is not functioning. Another response, that is one response, but there's others. There could be an emotional response of crying, screaming, becoming a bully, if I'm using bully as an example. But they may say, well, I'm not going to be picked on. My response is going to be to do the same, or to cry. But also there's the physical response, the increased heartbeat, the reddening of the face, the tightening of the fists, the rigidness against the wall when they see the bully coming down the hallway. But this physical response can be a whole variety of different physical responses. Or they just may be numb. They say, you know what, I'm going to avoid everyone, and I'm not going to connect with my friends. I'm going to put distance. My psychological avoidance is I'm not going to engage with the teacher. I'm not going to talk to my friends. I'm done. I'm just going to shut down. This, for those of you who are working with high school students, I am sure you're resonating with this one, because you probably see a lot of these on this list. And then, of course, the impact of trauma repetitive is that sense of safety. Oh, should I go to school today? Should I stay home? Should I go to math class today? I think I'll avoid that class and go to the next one. And so that sense of safety has been damaged. That sense of trust, of trusting those around us, trusting I'm going to be safe, trusting those folks I thought were friends. That diminished sense of trust becomes very, very clear. And then I see that we don't have on the Mentimeter, we had quite a few, but not as many as the adult level. But I do want to bring out early childhood trauma because we carry it. What occurs in early childhood matters because it affects the development of the cortex of the brain. And so when it is intense and it is prolonged, the developing brain has a shrinked cortex. And what this means is that that child does not have the capability to regulate their emotions very well. Their cognitive processing may be impacted. They are not going to respond what we call in a normal response to fear and to violence. And so this group of children from 0 to 6, from birth to 6, also don't have the cognitive or language skills that your older population has. So they don't have the understanding of what they're experiencing and the language skills to express their fears. So this is why this particular slide is here. Is for those of you who work with young children, there are some excellent websites we'll refer to later in the presentation, but these years are very intensified because they process trauma differently. They don't have the cognitive skills to process it. And so many times they will carry it. My example of the elevator, I carried it. I couldn't make sense of it when I was younger, and I had to have years pass to deal with the intensity of it. Young children will typically blame themselves. High school students do this too, though. They will blame themselves for a crisis or for not coming through, but it's much more prevalent. The developmental difference of blaming yourself is much more prevalent in elementary and young children. I can't do anything. I see a lot of 15-year-olds in my neighborhood now with the youth program. They're like, it is what it is. It is what it is. That expression, like, I'm going to give up. And so such misconceptions amplify the negative effects of trauma on children's development, that helplessness that many of you pointed out from the very beginning of this workshop is children and youth both have this sense of helplessness. And then, of course, children depend on parents and caregivers and teachers. And, I meant to change this children to students because I know that this is the concern was for many of you to think, do these apply to my university students? Yes, they do. Trauma affects them emotionally. Trauma affects them physically. And when trauma impacts teachers, relationships may be strongly affected. And teachers do not live in a bubble. We are also affected by the community trauma. And without trusted support, children and older individuals may be unable to regulate their emotions. So this childhood trauma may be carried into the high school years or the university years, where they get angry quickly. You might see something that in your mind seems so not so huge, triggers that high school student into a rage where they just can't handle too much stress. There's a little bit of stress and they go off the deep end. And so, or they may just shut down, which goes to the other end of sort of the trauma continuum of unable to communicate their feelings or needs. They they display behaviors that the teachers don't understand. I don't know how many fifth grade level teachers are out there. I taught 1 year fifth grade, and let me tell you, I think fifth grade teachers are amazing because it's at sort of a turning point of development. You're not sure where they're coming from. And I had many children I simply could not understand. I was in an inner city school where the students were mostly bigger than me physically and had lives that were so complicated and so complex and had seen so much violence. So their behaviors at 15, I was really struggling to understand as a young teacher. I wasn't from their neighborhood. And so we really need to hone in on what's going on with that student. What's happening? Here's some
Georgiana, sorry to
pause.
interrupt. I'm just feeling our audience. I'm feeling myself and kind of like my own anxiety rising as we're talking about these topics, which I know are near and dear to lots of teachers from their classrooms here. And I just wanted to give you some feedback that I think we're all feeling this like alongside of you. And we're looking forward to kind of some helpful, I think, diagnostics and a productive way forward. So thank you for such a good description. And I don't have anything else to say. I just wanted to jump in and say thank you for that description. And let's
go back to that little wiggle sign, the signs of trauma. I have a great team to work with, and she found this little wiggle sign because trauma is never a straight path. The signs of trauma are sometimes, they're all over. They are right when we try to figure them out, we think we've got it. Just as the young boy in Atlanta, I really thought I had him figured out. Nope, the road turned, there was another layer. There was another layer to his trauma. So this road is complicated. So let's move ahead and see the kinds of things we can do and might observe. So I had a couple descriptions of some of the children or students I worked with. What might you be seeing as a teacher in your region? What do you see? The bullying? Do you see them shutting down?
Oh, Georgiana, you have primed us for this question because we're getting immediate responses. And we've got a response as crying, hitting, so physical abuse with the kids hitting other kids, withdrawal, misbehavior, also like posture, kind of like a crunched, sunken posture, not talking, students withdrawing with themselves, maybe withdrawing into like their digital worlds, some like unexpected comments to other students, rudeness. But those are like came right away. You didn't even have to ask the question. Our teachers were already populating the box.
Oh, I'm so glad you're with me, folks. Wherever you're sitting, I'm so glad you're with me because your responses are spot on, spot on. The crying is a huge one. And for me, it's a little bit of a hot button, and we'll get into our little hot buttons because there's some behaviors that teachers go, oh, that one's a tough one to deal with. Exactly like you said, withdrawal, they might cross their arms, they might shield their faces, attachment, they might be overly clingy. I used to call some of my children who, my Velcro babies, it's not a very nice thing to say, but they would be clinging to my leg or clinging to my waist. I always thought, why can't I have a smaller waist? They would cling so tight sometimes because they were super vigilant about their trauma. They wanted to be attached. They wanted to feel safe all morning.
I'm thinking, Georgiana, I actually had a student when I wore a skirt who would like roll herself into my skirt, like physically hiding inside of me. That's really an interesting comment.
Oh, there was a teacher next to me who had a skirt child. Yeah, we call it the skirt child, but all children choose different ways. I had one, there was a table leg. And I did not realize later, the following year when I was packing up my furniture, he had been carving messages underneath the table because I would leave him there for a bit just so that until he felt secure, but he would go under the table and just cling the table. And I never realized he was drawing and doing things under the table. And they were scary pictures, but the helplessness, children will come to us, and the facial, teachers know their students best. They know them well, they have a bond with them. So the body language sometimes is not about language. And many of you pointed that out. It is about the physical behavior, the withdrawal, the crossing of the arms, all of those physical behaviors tell us a lot. And they may be immediate, they may be prolonged, but when they're prolonged and they occur for a while and then they disappear and they come back, then we're looking at PTS. Post-traumatic stress disorder, I am still learning about. I'm really digging into this area because behaviors that I thought were gone, that we had a handle on, the child was thriving, something will trigger them. So PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, these behaviors come up long after the event. They might be persistent and they might be intensified. The flashing of lights, there's a lot of tools that teachers use to transition students from one thing to another. I always say, do not use bells, do not use instruments, do not use the light switch, stay away from those because they could be triggers. And one of the responses could be nervousness, they're jumping around, they're quick to startle. And I learned, I observed a lot of students reacting to light switches and that jumpiness, that startledness, particularly if they have special needs as well, re-experiencing it in their dreams, re-experiencing in images, a location in town could trigger the reaction. And what's not on this screen is smells. I went through this last night and I'm like, oh, I forgot to, but the sensory idea of smells, certain smells can trigger an emotion. Certain smells can elicit a memory, a great memory. If you have a grandma who wore a certain perfume and oh, that's Granny's perfume, but also a smell can be, oh my gosh, that was the bomb squad coming in and dismantling. That smell, I know that smell. I know that smell. Or right now, avoidance and withdrawal could be another reaction. But feeling lost or helpless, you as teachers see, you feel, you hear, And I should put smell. We know these behaviors. We observe these behaviors. Teachers have, I always say that third sense. They know what's up.
Everyone's
know
with you,
students.
Georgiana. And I think like we're all having like a visceral reaction to what you're describing. And, you know, as teachers, we are problem solvers. I think that it's in our very nature, and we're caregivers, right? So I think we're already like, what do we do?
But now what?
That's right. Now what?
Okay, let's take a deep breath. If you want to stretch your arms to make your lungs bigger, I usually do that. Or you can do the stretch, the carrot yoga, and pretend you're like a little carrot stretching up, growing, your stalk is growing. Calm yourself. How do you calm yourself? Now here, this is where we're going to calm ourselves in transition, but please share with us how you calm yourself. Sometimes I'll put on music, but everyone calms themselves a different way. So
good. We've got someone else who's immediately said, like, Vanya, I listen to music. Someone else says, I count back from 5 slowly. I listen to soft music, meditation. I look at calming images, probably like this one on your slide. Comfort places, comfort foods, comfort music, playing music, walking, going for a walk. That has also come out in a couple of places. Someone else has just said, you know, getting into nature, out into fresh air, more walking. Oh, and this is a good one. Someone has said playing as a form of calming. So these are great. And I don't know about this teacher, but this teacher says that he or she drinks coffee, like pauses and have coffee, which could cause you more stress if you're of a certain personality, but also might make you calmer. Someone else immediately responded, drink tea, being with somebody you love, a cat. A cat helps a lot.
oh, yes. Yes. All of you have not met my little Dimitri. He's my calming dog, and he's usually in the background on the couch. But instead, you might see my plant. I moved this plant because nature calms me too. So all of you are just brilliant with these responses, because all of them are calming. They take away for that moment. And yes, this lovely picture, as soon as I saw it, I wanted to dip my toes into the water. But we think of all these ways to calm ourselves when we're stressed. And these are protective factors. These are useful tools. So let's take the journey and let's find some other tools. We've already learned about some of the indicators of trauma, but let's look at what we can do as teachers to care for those who are affected by trauma. And that includes us. That includes us to care for our students, but also to care for ourselves as well. So let's take a look. We can start, and many of you said this already, so I'm feeling like, I'm repeating. Many of you said attachment with friends, with family, find your tribe, find your go-to people. Before this presentation started, I commended the wonderful team. They're my team that will help me feel nourished for this moment. Having some knowledge, going to your support system and looking at the parenting and support that you need as a teacher, but also for your students. Making those social connections. If the forest nurtures you, going back, go to the forest. If water nurtures you, go to water. If putting your feet into a little pond nurture you, go to that pond. If music, soft music is your go-to, go to that. But building your resilience, taking those deep breaths, taking those moments and giving yourself time. I always say we work so hard to build our strength, and we're so easy to give it away as teachers because we serve. We are educated, we are trained to serve. We give our time away. So this time I'm saying, keep your time, build your adult resilience so that you can help your students build that. And then build your social and emotional competence with your friends and family and your colleagues so that you can build those protective factors in your students. But you already said that. So let's put our hand on that log. I always look at that log and I want to put my hand on that log, that tree, because nature grounds us. There's so much power in taking a deep breath, sticking your head out the window, or taking that walk that brings us back to a strength base. So those protective factors.
Sorry to interrupt you, Georgiana, but there's something about this tactile element of touching something. And I want to share a comment. I think that has warmed many of our hearts from the Zoom box about Sam, who keeps a plushie, a stuffed animal, in the classroom named Keisha. And that's for both the teacher and the student. So something, not a tree, but something they can physically hug or pet or hold. And I just thought that was too precious not to share with you and with the wider group.
Well, let me tell you, I had Froggy hanging on a line in my 4th grade class, and Froggy was hanging on a little cord. I'm so sorry to share this with you, but it brings back a memory. My kids, my little boys who were the toughies, would bop it. They would bop it. And it was almost like they needed to smack it once to start the day. And I thought I wanted to put it as a nurturing to hug, 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 but he turned into sort of a multi-purpose Froggy. So whatever works, whether it's your Froggy or your lizard or whatever stuffed animal, and for high school students, it could be a completely different strategy of just having something at their front entrance to kind of, let go of the stress. It might be a bunch of Play-Doh, it might be a project, but something to let it go as they enter into your world, your environment that you control. Because we can't control everything out there, but we can control our classroom. So help! Here's our tools. Here's our tools. We need tools to support and to guide our students. We want to empower them as young adults. We want to empower them as middle schoolers. We want to empower them as elementary schools because we want them to develop these tools so that when they leave us to the next level or they leave us to another region, they are helped by our knowledge and tools. So let's see what we can do. Oh, and here we go. You observe a student. Oh, I love her face because I have seen this face a million times. You observe a student bullying and using demeaning language and to others in the classroom. And we are loosey-goosey in this country with our language. And I'm part Ukrainian, and we are loosey-goosey with language. So you might hear some really demeaning language of a student bullying. What do you do? What do you do? And here again, here's that heart, my reaction. Ah, there's my brain. Okay, now what can I do?
It's good to have these like brain responses. So I'll invite everybody to go ahead and put your responses in chat, whether you're on Facebook or Zoom. We'll be scooping them up and sharing them with the wider community. And I see we've got a couple already. So Erin has shared a community circle is a good way to deal with the situation. Another teacher has said talking to the student privately after class. And I invite others. I see there's more coming in. We just have to be patient. So these are good heart and brain moments. Can simply ask the student, what is wrong and how can I help? That's a great phrase.
That's a great phrase. Let's. Oh, I want to know who wrote that one in the chat because you were way ahead of me here. Yes, we stop. We take a deep breath. We acknowledge there's a lot we don't know. I don't know what's going on with this student, and we might imagine what they're going through. And then we reflect on some possible, it might be they didn't have food. Maybe they drank too much coffee. Maybe they had a fight with their mother. We go through all these possible causes. And then we kind of take another deep breath and start asking those caring questions that that someone shared in the chat box. Yes, we are. Tell me what happened. Can you tell me? Can you start at the beginning? Can you? And this takes practice, because sometimes we want to lean in and fix everything, but we have to step back and say, okay, I need to listen more and practice more, and say, wait, and ask those caring questions. And then we observe. We might ask those caring questions and we may get zero response. And I'm going to say this really quickly because I'm watching my time here, is you may not get the response you were expecting. Just be ready. Or you may not get a response today. But you may ask that question tomorrow and say, you know what, did you have some time to think about what I asked you? Or you may wait because you know your students. I have found sometimes with my older students, my university students, they may not tell me for weeks. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, I just had one yesterday. She said, you know what, we had that conversation. I said, oh, and I had to kind of rewind. She said, I really want to tell you this. So it takes time to process for some students, and then they'll share. But be observant. Be observant. Okay. Observe and document what you see. So I was like, saying, and she wouldn't answer me. I thought, okay, she's still thinking about it. I'll just put the date down. And I put the date down. That's why I knew it was 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I had that conversation. I'm like, and if I didn't write it down, I would not have remembered, quite honestly. But 2 weeks ago, I asked her about that, and she wasn't willing to share. So I'm glad I documented it. It helps you see patterns. It helps you see and recognize your unconscious biases, because my unconscious biases, I want her to answer right now. I want to know, but she wasn't ready. And then my emotional reactions and her emotional reactions is what's going on with her. But documenting helps you respond and plan and provide that instructional and emotional support to the students. This can be done however you like. Some of us like to write narrative notes. Some of us like to do maps. Some of us like to do sort of concept maps. We put the concept in the middle bubble rather. Some of us like to seating charts and write notes about how it looks when there's a different seating pattern. Whatever tools you like to use, record what you see, record what's going on. Sometimes things are going really smoothly, so you might just focus on one student. Sometimes it's the crying starts going across the classroom and they're like, whoa, I need to do a group observation rather than just individual. So when did it happen? Was it 1 minute of crying? For me, crying always seems like it's forever. So I really document crying, because when I hear crying, it's just like, oh, especially when it's really intense screaming crying, I think it lasts forever. But when I start to document, I realize the crying only lasted a minute. It's my brain's, memory of it that is distorted if I don't document it. And then I realize, oh, it happened before lunch when she had to go outside. Now I know what triggers it. So I kind of, I'll go backtrack and say, okay, the crying isn't that horrible. It's only for a minute. And so I can have an action plan. I documented it, so I know what to do now. Now what? We understand, we recognize the signs of trauma, and we've documented it. So let's act. Let's do something. Let's listen to and observe our students.
In fact, Georgiana, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but we have something worth sharing that I kind of want to make sure our audience hears.
Please do.
Before, and actually it kind of leads into this action plan, but we've got a teacher in the chat named Ismat, who says that a practice in his or her classroom is that every day they start with a discussion followed by a pretty simple question, which is, what good deed or deeds have you done before coming to school today? And the students, one by one, describe their deed gladly and with great interest as a way of positive affirmation. And so a way maybe to protect, but also to be positive and create space for every student in the room. And I just wanted to share that before.
Oh, I love it. That is, I'm going to write that one down. That is lovely, because what that does, it captures four of the protective behaviors that you want to promote. It builds a sense of community. it emphasizes a pro-social, positive behavior, but it's affirming, it's private and it's personal, but it's also made public. So it captures so much. So I really like that one. Whatever practice that you do at the beginning of the day, remember, as you know, all of you are teachers, sets the tone. It sets the tone for the day. And I would propose to use that same practice or a similar one to close the day. So whether it's calling out their names and saying, hey, have a fabulous night, go do those great deeds, or whatever it is that you're closing your day with, use that same sort of protective factor strategy at the end of the day, because we have no idea what that evening will look like. Thank you for interrupting me. I love it. You can keep interrupting me all you want, Jen, because these voices of teachers I really would love to hear. Your high frequency behaviors are really important. They might be crying, they might be bullying. You know your students, but there's always a classroom with some high frequency. And language counts. All of you are English language teachers. Language counts. So use we. We have just watched so-and-so have a really sad morning and she's crying a lot. Let's be kind to our friends. So language, the language that we use rather than I, using a much more collective mode of language, really will target some of these high frequencies. So the students are right with you as a observer too, to say, oh no, this is where so-and-so is having a really tough day. The third action plan is all of you will receive a whole list of references and resources. And these may vary in your region, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, but these may vary in your region. So identify your goals, start small, don't get really big and ambitious, and instructional goals of having things like a morning circle, a morning talk, a morning exercise, and at the end of the day, and you can even have it at the midpoint of the day, repeat it. Identifying environmental goals. And environmental goals are things that you do to change your classroom to nurture. Many of you had, several of you had examples, such as the animal, art materials, etc. What kinds of things can you do to your classroom to support and guide positive sharing and positive building for resilience? Because we all have brains and hearts, and both are vital in this process. So when you're thinking about changing things in your classroom environmentally, think of the social emotional. What can I do to make my class more welcoming and to support that emotional piece? And so let's take a look. Who do you reach out to? Who do you reach out? How do you find information to help you address trauma-related issues in the classroom? And I'm going to give you one example before you start sharing, because I didn't think about this when I was preparing for this. When I started working with children who were unaccompanied coming into my country, I wanted to be their emotional advocate in the court system. For the judges weren't trained. We had over 400,000 children in the late 2015, 2016 coming into my region. Hundreds were on campus, hundreds were on the streets, lots of kids ranging from 2 to 18. I wanted to be part of the solution, so I became an advocate. But what I knew so little about the court system. I had to reach out to my colleagues who were doing the child advocacy work, who were attorneys. I had to reach out to the psychologists of my region to find out where there was training. I discovered the Immigrant Center up in Chicago, the Chicago Law School, and went through their training. So I had to reach out to different people I would normally not reach out to. So when you're thinking about this question, it is not just the professionals, it is people who are out in the trenches, who might be doing this work, who have addressed similar trauma issues in their classroom. So
no, this is great, Georgiana, and I think our audience definitely has their own resources that they go to. And so I encourage everybody to go ahead and put their own references, resources. Who do you go to? What do you go to when you need to find more information? I'm sure you've already encountered this. I know that there are lots of situations in our region that would lead you to look for resources. If you have any specific resources for your country or for that might be available, you can also share those. We've got some comments already. Go to the school counselor. I ask colleagues. I talk to parents. That's an interesting one, right? If you can talk to people's parents or if that's possible. I have another one like go back to reference books, look online for teacher forums to find other kinds of advice. One more here, search for information in my online network, maybe in WhatsApp or online too. And I would say that's also what I do. I'm teaching a class with refugees right now in Tallinn, and I've used my network a lot to find appropriate resources. So other teachers seems to be our most popular answer. Georgiana.
And many of you identified them already, so I'm going to just reiterate them. Trauma specialists. Because of the pandemic, we have a lot more trauma specialists internationally. UNICEF has a whole section on their website on trauma. Healthcare organizations might have trauma specialists, aid agencies and NGO teams, and of course an e-resource list will be shared with you. But I think the comment of parents, that is a really valuable source, particularly if you're trying to figure out a particular child and working with the parents. And that is going to be in the second session of working with parents and communities. But working closely with parents about an individual child or student is really key, because who knows that student better than us is the family system. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes. Okay, let's take a look at the resource list will be shared, so we can move on to our next. I love this photograph of holding hands. These are my go-tos. And I am sure you're going to have a lot of other ones. Let's go to the page with the 5 there or 6. I have a whole host of groups I'm a member of through social platforms, and they are private rooms. But American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, 0 to 3 for those of you who are in early childhood. There is a International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies. And they have it developmentally sectioned off so that you can go into that website and go to different levels of development, which I love. Some of these are American, but some of these are international. There's even the Red Cross has a whole host of specialists in trauma that work internationally. So they're not really Americanized. They work internationally so that they're much more global. And that Red Cross is not on here, but these are the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And so these are my go-tos. And so I know that you will have your favorite, I call it the gold mine list of where to go for information. But I strongly get your cup of coffee or get your cup of tea and kind of explore these to see if they are useful to you. And then of course we make our action plan and we revisit it to look at those high frequency behaviors. And then I use this one because this is my hot button, and you may have your own hot button, bullying in high school, but crying for me is my hot button. And so this is the one I really want to address because I have dealt with lots of crying. And so I identify the behavior. I focus on this particular student or students. And I might start looking at, my questioning strategies, using my compassionate curiosity, start practicing my compassionate curiosity skills, start promoting these protective behaviors. And then I plan a sharing time, a listening time for concerns during instruction. It might be just a few minutes, or it might be 10 or 15 minutes, depending on the intensity. But I'm not going to just ignore it. I'm going to plan for it because I know it's going to happen tomorrow. With my 2 that I'm thinking of right now, it's going to happen the next day. I know it's going to happen. So what I want to do is make sure I plan for it. There's that expression in teaching, if you don't plan for it, it doesn't happen. I always think of that. And then I want to make sure that I provide instructional choices that where they can express themselves. I can't spend all my day with these two children, right? So I want to make sure I have instructional choices all around my classroom where they can express themselves through art, through poetry, through multimedia recycled art. It might be through journal writing. I've had a lot of my older students do journals, but I want them engaged in different kinds of things so they can express themselves regarding why they're so emotionally, upset. And so, and providing books on emotions or providing literature for high school students on a whole wide range of emotions is really valuable. Those are some of the environmental goals, making sure art material is available, making sure the literature is available, making sure you have a space. In early childhood, we call it the safe zone or the thinking zone. It's a space in the classroom. It might be a comfy chair with a fish tank beside it, might be a comfy chair with a bunch of big plants. It might be a little patio chair. It is not isolated from the classroom. It is integrated into the classroom, but it is clearly an area for self-soothing and reflection. Nobody bothers that person who's hanging out over there. I used to have 3 teenagers who used to go into my other, and I said, are you sure you all want to be in there? They said, yeah, we want to be in here. So the 3 teenagers were all stuffed in this one corner of the room, but that was and it was interesting because they were talking and on task. They were discussing their emotions and regulating each other. So it was, so what works in early childhood sometimes is completely different for high school.
We've got a couple of pieces of input that I want to just share to move the conversation a little bit because they're personalized examples. One is creating routines around leaders. And so we have another example of kind of using an alphabetical list and encouraging each and every student to be a leader, especially after the pandemic and wanting to be inclusive. And this ISMAT is finding that the students rise to the challenge. So it's a great way to adapt a routine to create safe spaces for everybody to shine. There's another comment here about maybe finding comfy spaces or something called Kids Talk to be able to share. And there's some more here, just those kinds of ideas that you're talking about environment that I think our audience agrees with.
Since 2 sharings have been about transitional or system. I call them classroom systems. How we move people from one place to another. How how we get them into lines. How we give them opportunities for being a leader. I would stress if you were individually designing these, I would encourage you to think about how to collectively change some of those strategies to more collective. Having 2 leaders rather than 1. Having 2 documenters rather than 1 to promote that sense of community. And I'll just say this from an ego country-centric position is, in the United States, frequently we individualize way too much in the classroom for classroom practice. And we really have to shift to much more collective practices to encourage that 2 children can be leaders. And this is a collaborative social emotional goal as well. So if you're thinking about those things, think collectively as well. It's strategies for processing. And here is just some ideas: puppet play, role playing, debates are great forums for high school students, role playing, dramas, reenacting dramas, and you can write your own script for the drama, painting, literature. For those of you who are working with younger children, painting and art are really great avenues and strategies for processing trauma when they are not able to, or cognitively or linguistically, to express it. But older students, they are able to many times. And so I encourage the drama and the literature for the older students. But for younger children, many children, I would have not understood their trauma if it weren't for painting. I had some children who didn't talk to me for months until—
Georgiana, sorry to interrupt again.
Please.
But I'm just noticing our timing, and I want to make sure that
Yes.
we get through our presentation, because I have a couple of private comments saying, oh, we want to discuss, we can't wait to speak with Georgiana, so that we reserve that space for interaction. So
Let's move along.
let's move along, and we can come back to this, I think, in our discussion.
We're almost there, and I just looked at the time and was in shock. So if I've been talking really fast, I'm so sorry, everyone. But here we go. We want them to thrive. We want them to achieve in classroom, right? We want them to build resiliency if they don't have those factors. And we want them to reconnect with one another. So let's move on. See, these are our goals. And we want them to cope successfully in spite of that trauma. And that capacity changes over time. So we need to pay attention. Let's pay attention and really build that. We want them to show up in class day after day. Hey, we'll see you tomorrow. I love that answer. Let's go. So-and-so had this answer. Can I get more? Can I have more? And to promote those healthy friendships and to display that I trust you may not be participating today, but tomorrow's another day. Let's do it. But reconnect with your students in really positive ways. And I'm moving right along at record speed here. So I want you to think about those. And today we've identified types of trauma. And I know that they're sad. They are painful to even hear. They are painful to review in a PowerPoint, but they are real. But we also learned the impact of trauma, and we explored some possible responses to trauma. So we learned about protective factors and practicing compassionate curiosity. And all of you shared such great ideas. So please share those with each other, planning for action, and really promoting those desired student outcomes by practicing some of these skills. There's no timestamp for trauma. Trauma is prevalent. It's pervasive in every community. It is pervasive before COVID. It's pervasive before a war conflict. It is reality. But we as teachers, and I say this really strongly, and I don't know who the author of this is. I always think about it though, because there's no timestamp. It could occur at any time. But teachers have this amazingly profound opportunity to transform the community through their care, their compassion, and their knowledge of trauma through their practices. And so I am so sorry that I was a little fast on the end, but all of you sitting here listening to me today have this amazing opportunity. And so in spite of the sadness, in spite of the pain, your position gives you that opportunity to make, I know this sounds so Georgiana, to make a difference, to make a really, really big difference. So thank you. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening to me. And I really wish I could hear all your voices, and I look forward to facilitating the next session. But it is a great opportunity to address these traumatic events. And it seems kind of like, oh, but it's a good opportunity to use our brains as well as our hearts in doing that.
No, thank you, Georgiana. I feel like you've caused a lot of great reflection today. I appreciate the heart moments and the brain moments. And I want to thank you for all of this wisdom, and also invite our audience to stay on Zoom or on Facebook. We'll be sharing here in a second the transition to go ahead and get us to the discussion. We would like to talk to you. So we're going to move to another Zoom space with Georgiana and with our regional English language officers, Lottie Baker and Kevin McCoy, to talk a little bit with each other. I hope you'll continue to spend time with us. I think we have about 40 minutes that are carved out for that kind of sharing, and also productive, I think, planning for our classrooms. And for those of you that might be watching this at another time, I want to give you a warm welcome to our second webinar, which will be focusing on classroom strategies, practical things you can do with students who might have experienced trauma. It'll be on June 2nd, same time, same place. So the RELO Belgrade Facebook page, or you can find us on Zoom by registering. We would really love to have you, so mark your calendars. And with that, I will also let you know that the slide presentation and resources will be made available to you. You can find that URL in the chat box and also in whether you're in Zoom or Facebook. But for now, I just want to thank you, Georgiana, for all of the beautiful remarks, the reminders, and kind of setting the stage for our discussion. And everyone else, please join us right now. We'll just be hopping from one room to another. So thank you, Lottie and Kevin. I don't know if you want to say thank you, but I want to say thank you to my region for joining us. And I look forward to meeting you for discussion here in a few minutes.
Yes, looking forward to it. Thank you, Georgiana, and thank you, Jen, for moderating, and hope to see some of you in the other Zoom room in a few minutes.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you shortly.
All right, bye.